Alright, let's dive into one of the world's most fascinating civilizations, ancient Egypt. But today I'm not just talking pyramids and mummies, I'm busting the biggest myths you've probably heard and replacing them with the real facts. When you gaze upon the Great Pyramid of Giza, one of the last surviving wonders of the ancient world, it's easy to be overwhelmed. How did a civilization from over 4,500 years ago, without modern machinery, construct something so massive, so precise, so enduring? This question has fueled centuries of speculation, from lost technologies to alien intervention. But the most persistent and widely believed story is one of immense human suffering. You know the one. It's been burned into our minds by countless Hollywood epics, tens of thousands of slaves toiling under the blistering Egyptian sun, driven by the merciless crack of an overseer's whip. This powerful image, first popularized by the ancient Greek historian Herodotus and supercharged by cinema, paints a grim picture of the pharaoh's power, built on the backs of a broken people. But here's the explosive truth, backed by decades of modern archaeology. That entire narrative is a myth. The pyramids were not built by slaves. The real story is far more complex and reveals a society that was more organized, more prosperous, and frankly, more human than the movies ever let on. So, how do we know? Archaeologists, led by figures like Dr. Mark Lehner, unearthed the ultimate proof right next to the pyramids, the lost city of the pyramid builders. This wasn't a slave camp, it was a highly organized town. They found evidence of massive bakeries and fish processing facilities. And in the workers' cemetery, they found something incredible. The skeletons showed that injured workers received advanced medical care. Bones were set, and amputations were performed with a surprising degree of skill. These people were cared for and healed. They were valuable assets, not disposable property. And what about their pay? Forget gold coins. The workers were paid in the currency of ancient Egypt, bread, and most importantly, beer. Each worker received daily rations, providing calories and hydration. This wasn't a slave's gruel, it was a staple of the Egyptian diet. These were skilled craftsmen and laborers, a mix of a permanent crew and seasonal farmers who worked on the pyramids during the Nile's annual flood. For them, this wasn't slavery, it was a national project, a form of civic duty. They were building a stairway to the heavens for their king, ensuring the stability of the entire cosmos. We even have their graffiti inside the pyramids, with team names like the Friends of Khufu Gang, a clear sign of pride and camaraderie, not oppression. It was the ultimate government job of the ancient world, tough, respected, and a way to serve God and country. Now, let's talk about the guys at the top, the pharaohs. When you picture a pharaoh, you probably imagine a god king with absolute power, snapping his fingers and having pyramids built, a figure straight out of a Cecil B. DeMille epic. The kind of ruler Hollywood loves to show, draped in gold, whose every whim is law. But the truth is that level of unquestioned authority is one of the biggest myths about ancient Egypt. The pharaoh's throne was less of an untouchable perch and more of a high-wire balancing act. In reality, a pharaoh had to constantly juggle the interests of several incredibly powerful factions. Think of it as a political Game of Thrones, Egyptian style. First, you had the priesthood. These weren't just quiet men of faith, they were kingmakers. The priests, especially the high priests of Amun-Ra at Thebes, controlled vast estates, immense wealth, and most importantly, the divine narrative. They were the gatekeepers to the gods, and if they decided a pharaoh had lost divine favor, his reign was in serious trouble. Just ask Akhenaten, the heretic king, who tried to sideline the priests with his own sun god, Aten. It was a bold move, but after his death, the old gods and their powerful priests came roaring back, and his legacy was all but erased. Then there were the nobles and the bureaucracy, led by the vizier, the pharaoh's right-hand man. This was the machinery of the state, controlling everything from tax collection to the justice system. A savvy vizier could wield enormous influence, and a coalition of disgruntled nobles could grind the kingdom to a halt. And let's not forget the army. A successful general, fresh from a victorious campaign, could become a national hero, commanding the loyalty of his troops. More than one pharaoh, like Horemheb, started his career as a general and ended it on the throne. So imagine being a CEO, but your head of finance controls the country's spiritual beliefs, your COO can veto your decisions, and your head of security has his own army. That was life as a pharaoh. But if the pharaoh's power is a myth, what about the most famous Egyptian myth of all? The one that has fueled countless horror movies and campfire stories, the Curse of the Mummy. This idea that cracking open a 3,000-year-old tomb would unleash a supernatural killing machine is almost entirely a modern invention, supercharged by the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb in 1922. When the expedition's financier, Lord Carnarvon, died suddenly a few months later, the global press went into a frenzy. They connected his death from an infected mosquito bite to a similar mark on King Tut's death mask, and the legend of the curse was born. Every subsequent death, no matter how mundane, was added to the curse's tally. So, what's the reality? A 2002 study tracked the 44 Westerners present when the tomb was opened and found they lived to an average age of 70, no different from anyone else. Howard Carter himself lived for another 17 years. The real danger wasn't supernatural but scientific. A sealed tomb can be a perfect breeding ground for ancient, potentially toxic molds and bacteria like Aspergillus, which could certainly worsen an infection in someone with a weakened immune system. And while the ancient Egyptians did place protective inscriptions on tombs, they weren't Hollywood-style curses. They were warnings of divine judgment in the afterlife, not promises of a linen-wrapped monster chasing you down a hallway. It was a no trespassing sign for the soul, not a magical booby trap. All right, let's talk about one of the biggest game changers in human history: writing. When we think of Egyptian writing, our minds immediately jump to the Rosetta Stone, and for good reason. This slab of rock was the ultimate cheat code that unlocked an entire civilization. Discovered in 1799, its true value lay in its 3 identical inscriptions: sacred hieroglyphs, everyday Demotic script, and ancient Greek. With the Greek translation as a guide, the brilliant Jean-François Champollion finally cracked the code, and suddenly 3,000 years of Egyptian history began to speak. But here's a common misconception: that hieroglyphs were the way Egyptians wrote. Not even close. Think of hieroglyphs as the fancy, formal font for a monument. For everyday stuff, they used a cursive script called hieratic, the fast handwriting of ancient Egypt. Later, they developed an even faster script called Demotic, the script of the people, used for business contracts, shopping lists, and even love letters. Yep, even back then, paperwork was a thing, and they had different scripts for every occasion. So what were they writing about? Everything. We have medical texts like the Ebers Papyrus with over 700 remedies for everything from crocodile bites to depression. We have found legal documents including surprisingly progressive marriage contracts. They wrote epic poems and stories like The Tale of Sinuhe, a blockbuster adventure about an Egyptian official in exile. They weren't just carving solemn pronouncements on temple walls. They were recording the entire, messy, beautiful spectrum of human experience. Now let's pivot to one of history's most misunderstood figures, Cleopatra. Say her name, and you probably picture an exotic femme fatale. She's been painted as a mysterious, seductive Egyptian queen. But the reality is far more impressive. The first major plot twist? Cleopatra wasn't ethnically Egyptian at all. She was Greek, specifically Macedonian Greek, a descendant of Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's top generals. After Alexander died, Ptolemy took Egypt, founding a dynasty that ruled for nearly 300 years. But here's what made Cleopatra different. For centuries, her family ruled from the Greek city of Alexandria, speaking Greek and ignoring Egyptian culture. Cleopatra was the young member of her dynasty to learn the Egyptian language. This was a brilliant political move, allowing her to be seen as a true pharaoh. But she didn't stop there. Ancient writers claim she spoke at least 9 languages. Imagine a diplomat arriving to negotiate and she greets you fluently in your own native tongue. That's a power move. This was just one tool in her arsenal. She was a brilliant strategist, a naval commander, and a shrewd economist who navigated Egypt through famine. Her relationships with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony weren't just romances. They were calculated political alliances. She needed Rome's military might to secure her throne and protect Egypt's independence. She used her intellect and charm to hold her own with the most powerful men in the world. The femme fatale narrative is largely Roman propaganda. The real Cleopatra was a formidable ruler and one of the most cunning politicians of her era. Finally, let's bust the biggest myth of all, that ancient Egypt was a gloomy, death-obsessed culture. It's an easy mistake to make. Why? Because what survives the ravages of time, the stone tombs and temples, their homes and palaces built from mud brick dissolved back into the earth. So, we're left with a skewed record that overemphasizes death. But if you look closely, you find a civilization that was bursting with life and a profound love for the good things this world has to offer. They loved to party. They held huge religious festivals with music, dancing, and feasting. They brewed beer and baked bread, but also enjoyed lavish banquets. They loved music, playing harps, lutes, and flutes, and they were obsessed with games. The most popular was Senet, a board game representing the journey to the afterlife. They also cared deeply about their appearance. Both men and women wore elegant linen clothing, elaborate wigs, and that iconic kohl eyeliner. It wasn't just fashion, it was believed to have magical protective qualities, and it helped reduce the sun's glare. They were a people who celebrated life with passion. So, while the pyramids and mummies are fascinating, they are only one chapter in a much larger story. This was a civilization of innovators who gave us a 365-day calendar and made incredible advances in medicine and engineering. They were storytellers, artists, and musicians. So next time someone brings up pyramids or mummies, you'll know the real story. Egypt was a land of innovation, creativity, and a vibrant love for life. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, history isn't always what you think it is.